Good evening, I guess, everyone. You guys are in for a treat. Something very awesome. 10 minutes ago, Daniel texted me and said he's stuck in traffic. He's on his way. He won't be here till 7:15. Will I kick off class? And I said, Daniel, I haven't been in this class. How's it going? And he gave me 3 bullet points. So, how's the book of Numbers going? But no, on a serious note, yeah, Daniel and Beth are stuck in traffic. He should be here and hopefully soon. I've been teaching the high school class, and I've got them going, and I'll run back there whenever Daniel gets here. So we're continuing our study on the Pentateuch, specifically with the book of Numbers. And so Daniel, he did send me a couple bullet points here, a review. How is the book structured? Now, again, to clarify, I don't know these answers. So whatever you say sounds good to me. Sounds good to me, and then, I'll get chastised from Daniel when he gets here, I guess. I don't know. How's the book structured? You guys tell me. I haven't been in here. 3 sections. Okay, there's chapters and verses. That's where I was going, Patty. Okay, there's 3 sections. So what's going on in that first section? Organization, okay. What was that, Patty? Okay, organizing the camp. And really, we saw that coming out of the other books. We specifically saw that at the end of Exodus and Deuteronomy as well. The specific layout of the camp, it was very intentional, specific. It was not random. You didn't pitch your tent wherever you wanted to. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was organized by tribes, if I recall. What was in the center of the camp? Tabernacle. Okay. Where and what's going on in the first section? So chapters 1 through 10. What's happening there? Or is that the organization behind it? Okay. The preparation. Okay. How does Israel respond in chapters 1 through 10? Obedience. It was positive, I think, right? Okay. What happens? Where does 10, latter had a 10 into 12 take place? At the tabernacle. Where's the location, I guess, right now of where the people are camped at? On the road? That's a legitimate question. I don't know. I thought they may be still at Mount Sinai. But so are they at the Mount Sinai? Got it. Okay. 1 through 10a, they are 10 and a half through 12. They disperse the camp. Okay. A question I do know, where are they heading towards? Okay. Yeah. That's what Robert said. I'm sorry, Brian. I should have clarified it. Yeah. Chapters 1 through 10 are still at the foot of the holy mountain, right? Yeah. Do you remember from previous days, how long were they camped at Mount Sinai? Do you remember? How long were they camped at Mount Sinai? Yeah, I think it's a couple years, if I recall. 1 or 2, if I recall. Sometimes I don't know. You think about the books themselves, and sometimes maybe we forget that, wow, this was 1 or 2 years, not 1 or 2 decades, if you will. Okay. How does Israel respond in chapters 11 and 12? Terrible. Buffy says terrible. Okay, good. What was the issue going on? Short-sighted memory, right? Because we had it so good in Egypt, I wish we were still there, right? How bad it was, that's right. Dan, they forgot how bad it was. That's good in the sense of there was food. That may be the extent of the goodness, if you will. All right, come on, Daniel. Chapters 1 through 10, prep at Mount Sinai. So, okay, here we go. The wilderness, the organization, Patty, you said. The second half of the chapters, 5 through 10, instruction. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe what happens at the beginning of Numbers is like the specific, it says instruction, I guess, but the specific, how they're going to operate the rest going towards the promised land, right? Specific, I want to say rules and regs, but to a certain degree, rules and regs. How to travel, how to prepare, how to organize. Again, if I'm off base on that, please let me know. But that is the plan. They had the duties. Yep. Yep. Yeah, no, good point, Brian. You think about, at least me anyway, I think about like the role or the job itself of the specific priest leadership and whatnot. I don't know about you guys, but I think of like the term priest, maybe Catholicism and whatnot. You have like white robes, orderly, clean. My understanding, interpretation of the Old Testament is that is a facade. The priestly job, yes, there was ritual garments to put on and things like that. Obviously, cleanliness, of course, but that was a bloody and dirty job. That was a, well, exactly. That was the kind of job you work with your hands, not maybe some clerical type or clergy type thing we think of today. So a lot of bleach stand. Okay, yeah. Okay, so Robert, you mentioned, so Numbers, second half of chapter 10, verse 12. Now we are setting off after, again, maybe a 1 or 2 year period, sitting at the base of the Holy Mountain. Is it 1 year, Steve? I couldn't remember. Is it? Okay. So right at the year mark, approximately. Okay. The point is, I think, from the whole totality of their journey, relatively a small amount of time, but when you think about the journey and, of course, wandering in the wilderness for 40 years and whatnot that's going to come, right, yeah. I would say at a minimum, 2 million people. Great multitude, I think, is what the scriptures say multiple times, a great multitude of people. So one of the things, not to digress here, but one of the things is, Mount Sinai would have to accommodate that type of gathering, that type of organization, that amount of people, that amount of livestock, and everything that goes into that. So, okay, so as we've seen, or what we will see as common, the people get up to leave, and what do they do? Dan, you kind of mentioned it, but complaint number 1. So chapter 11, verse 1, the complaint about adversity. And chapter 11, verses 1 and 3, the fire of the Lord burned. What does that mean? That's right. It was calamity. Which, of course, I'm sure Daniel's going to get there, but, of course, there's an application there about the way we talk to God matters. Yep. Okay. Well, it's complaint number 2. Is this new material, or did you already cover this part last week? Okay. Number 2 is complaint number 2. Who will give us meat? And then in verse 33, I believe they said, hey, the result of that was a very severe plague. Yep. Verse 33, but while the meat was still in between their teeth and before it had been consumed, the anger of the Lord burned against the people, and he struck them with a severe plague. Which is, I think we're going to see that habitual process, if you will. Complaint, God responds. Complaint, God responds. Complaint, God responds. Which, I think Daniel mentioned this in the Deuteronomy class, that part of the Pentateuch and part of the story of the Exodus and moving towards the Promised Land is God is refining, training, instructing his people on what it means to be God's people specifically. So training, you mentioned, Dan. I think that probably applies as well. What's complaint number 3? Okay. I guess no. Or Daniel has on here, questionable marriage, maybe, of Moses? And Aaron began to talk against Moses, right, Steve? Because he married a Cushite woman. That's what I remember from the story anyway. Yeah, it was a giving up power. I think is maybe more. They were concerned about giving up power, I should say, or influence maybe. Yeah. Yep. We did not. Okay. So did y'all end at chapter 11? All right, let me look at my text. So here's Daniel's question to ask. The question is, I'll just read this. It's something to the effect of, why do the people obey in chapters 1 through 10, but disobey in chapters 11 and 12? Why do you think that is? Did you say lack of faith, Patty? Okay. What else? What are some other possibilities, I guess? I guess really all complaints or maybe disobedience could be attributed to a lack of faith. Oh my goodness, thank goodness. Michael?
In a different way, with adversity, then,
yeah. I don't know. Maybe for us, like, do you ever get discouraged as life gets harder or more complex, or some sort of catastrophe or calamity may start to form, and then maybe, Patty, to your point, maybe our faith starts getting a little weak, easier to slip up, easier to mess up? Daniel, I think we covered really all of Numbers. So I don't know what there is to say, but
I'm superfluous. That's what.
Turn it over.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you, Jordan. It's very helpful to have people like that can jump in and cover. I was bummed though, because that's one of my favorite questions of what we've discussed so far. Well, I don't know where y'all were. Were y'all doing this question here or no? He was just winging it, huh? This is what y'all were doing, right? Okay. All right. I was like, what? Yeah. Okay. So let's pick up. Maybe we'll come back to this question in a future class. Kind of rehash it a little bit for my sake, if not for other people's. But let's just pick up in chapter 13. Okay. So we're not going to read all of 13 and 14, but we will read a lot of it. In our chart here that shows the complaints of the Israelites, there are 7 basically throughout the book. You know that 7 number is often significant, and at least the way this person who made the chart has conceived of it, the 7 complaints of the book of Numbers are symmetrical, right? That the first one, the last one are similar in the way that the people complain, what they complain about, how God handles it, how Moses handles it. The second and the second to last one match up. The third and the C's there match up. But then right in the middle is this big one here in Numbers 13 and 14. So that's one way to think about the kind of significance of this complaint. The other thing to note is that really throughout the rest of the Bible, throughout the Old Testament and in the New Testament, this is kind of referred back to as the kind of main central failure of the Israelites, because this is the sin that will keep them in the wilderness for 40 years and be the cause of that entire first generation dying off. So this is the big one here in chapter 13 and 14 of Numbers. So we want to focus on it. We won't read all of it. Let's start by summarizing a little bit. Look at Numbers 13, verses 1 to 20. You would see the instructions that are given to the spies. Okay? So one man of each tribe is selected to be a part of this spy team, so to speak. And they are to go into the land of Canaan and check it out, right? The 2 names that we remember are the spies that are faithful. And it is interesting to note that they are from the tribes of Judah and Ephraim. So we have Judah and Joseph represented here. Hoshea, it says in the text, has his name changed by Moses to Joshua. So it's Caleb and Joshua who we remember from the 12 spies. Their job is pretty straightforward and I think pretty sensible in the way that we would think about the task of conquering a land, of going into to take over a land. Go see what it's like, right? Check out what's there and what we're going to expect upon arrival. And interestingly, not in my version, the English is translated like make every effort, or make an effort in verse 20. But literally the word there is be strong in verse 20, and go in and get some of the fruit of the land. So this has echoes of the language that we will read later on in the book of Joshua, where Joshua was told, right, be strong and courageous. They are exhorted, be strong. You go into the land and check it out, okay? And then we read very briefly in verses 21 through 24 of basically them spying out the land. And there's a couple things of note. In verse 22, it talks about the descendants of Anak, the giants. They are named there, Ahiman, Shishai, and Talmai. That's either three great warriors, kind of like Goliath later on in history, or they are three clans of mighty warriors. But they are talked about, and then in verse 23 and 24, the fruit of the land, not only the pomegranates and the figs, but of course the famous cluster of grapes that they have to carry between two people out of the land. So up to this point, we have just the kind of description of the group of spies and what it is that they see in the land. So let's pick up reading then in verse 25. We're going to read for a little while here, 13:25 down to 14 verse 10, and read the report that the spies bring back and how the people of Israel respond to this report. Numbers 13, verse 25. When they returned from spying out the land at the end of 40 days, they proceeded to come to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the sons of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. And they brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Thus they told him and said, we went into the land where you sent us, and it certainly does flow with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, verse 28, the people who live in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large, and moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. Amalek is living in the land of the Negev, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites are living in the hill country, and the Canaanites are living by the sea and by the side of the Jordan. Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, we should by all means go up and take possession of it, for we will surely overcome it. But the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are too strong for us. So they gave to the sons of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone and spying it out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great size. There also we saw the Nephilim. The sons of Anak are part of the Nephilim, and we became like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. Chapter 14, verse 1. Then all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. All the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become plunder. Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt? So they said to one another, let us appoint a leader and return to Egypt. Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces in the presence of all the assembly of the congregation of the sons of Israel. Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, of those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes, and they spoke to all the congregation of the sons of Israel, saying, the land which we passed through to spy out is exceedingly good land. If the Lord is pleased with us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they will be our prey. Their protection has been removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. But all the congregation said to stone them with stones. Then the glory of the Lord appeared in the tent of meeting to all the sons of Israel. Okay. Question first. How would you summarize, in basic terms, how would you summarize the two reports here? Summarize for me the report of the 10 versus the report of the 12. Brian, kick us off here.
I'll begin by saying that both told the truth. But the The 2 trusted God, and the other 10, or it was 7 spies, the other 5 did not trust God and led the people into disobedience for lack of faith, according to the Hebrew writer.
Okay, thank you, Brian. So we have trust versus lack of faith. What else would you say about the basic difference between the 10 and the 2 here? Okay, the 10 were scared, and the 2 said we can do it with God's help. Scared of what? Okay, giants, right? That's kind of a thing, right? And what else? There's really 2 basic things that they note. Yeah, the big people, strong cities, right? And maybe this is what Brian can correct me if I'm wrong. But, you know, when Brian says they both told the truth, you know, you'd say that was true, that there were giants and strong cities in the land. And the 2, we might say, on the other hand, Joshua and Caleb, did they deny that there were giants and fortified cities in the land? No. It's like Dan said, they added to that, well, yeah, but God is with us, right? That's right, yeah, 27, 28. 27, it's very brief, right? And maybe this is a lesson that we can learn here from 27 and 28. 27, they say, okay, yeah, it is a land flowing with milk and honey, which, by the way, probably means like lots of pasture lands that would be good for cows. That's where milk comes from, after all. And then honey could be related to the kind of flowering beauty of the land, or it could be the figs, right, and the fruit trees and all that kind of thing. But, again, maybe there's a lesson here. They really don't spend too much time focusing on that. All these things, yeah, God promised that it would be this beautiful land. But, verse 28, the giants, right, focused on the problem, focused on the difficulty, the obstacle, the enemy. That is what fills their field of vision, right? They talk about the sons of Anak and the Nephilim, right? You have to go back to Genesis 6 and verse 4. You see this first reference to the Nephilim, these kind of great, mighty warriors. One of the things that's interesting, does anybody remember this from later on in Israel's history? These giants here, these 3 by name, these 3 great warriors, they're taken care of in the book of Joshua. Anybody remember how that happened or who did that? So in Joshua 15, verse 13 and 14, it says that when the people took over the land, this old guy named Caleb, 40 years after this event, is the one to go up into those hills and drive out these giants. Kind of a cool bookend to this story, okay? But the spies are afraid of the strong people, while Caleb says, here 40 years earlier, we will overcome them, right? And the people give into that bad report. They believe the 10 as opposed to the 2. And we see again, as we saw before, this absurd idea that Egypt would be better, right? They look at the fear ahead and they say, let's turn around and go back, right? But opposed to that, again, Joshua, Caleb in chapter 14 in verse 9, right? Yes, the people are strong, but the Lord has promised this. He's removed their protection from them. The Lord is with them. Do not fear them. Okay. To that point, if you go back in chapter 13 to verse 29, right? Again, they are listing off what we would say are true facts. That there are the Amalekites there, and there are the Hittites there, and the Jebusites, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites. Okay. All these ites, these are the exact nations and the exact people that were named by God back in the book of Genesis that would be driven out of this land, right? So even their reference to all of these ites here calls to mind the reality that Joshua and Caleb are trying to highlight. God told you that all these people live there and that he would drive them all out. And yet instead of believing what God had said and believing in his presence, believing in his promise, believing in his power, they give in to the fear and say, no, it'd be better to go back, better even to die in the wilderness, right? Comments or questions through this point, through verse 10 of chapter 14. The report and the faithless report and the faithless response of the people. Albert?
Unfortunately, it reminds me of like in school when I had to do book reviews. I was horrible at that skill set. So if they had listened to the task that was asked of them and then made the report, can you imagine the inspired Moses being able to say to these people to inspire and motivate them to get them ready to cross over to the land? But as I do, I started when I'm doing a book review. When I did a book review, I started to tell the story and from my perspective and my details, and that wasn't the task at hand. It's like outlining a book in the Bible as it's a learned skill, and so it's important for us to understand the instructions, follow them, and not add to them.
Thank you, Albert. And I'm thinking about, to your point about the perspective through which they are looking at things. Chapter 13, verse 33, we became like grasshoppers in our own sight, right? So even the way they phrase that, I think, highlights what you're saying, that they were looking at things from their point of view. And sure, yeah, from their point of view, they were just grasshoppers, right? All you have to do, though, is change the camera angle, change the perspective, listen to the instructions, and it takes on a whole new perspective, whole new reality, right? Brian? Interesting.
And instead, they were told to spy out the land, and instead they offered their opinion and basically preached a false doctrine that caused the fall of the people.
Thank you, Brian, for pointing that out. I don't know if I had thought about that, but Brian's point is basically that, all they were told to do was just, what did you see in the land? And they took it upon themselves to actually try to convince everybody else, hey, we're not able to do this, right? So there's an overstepping there. Steve, and then we'll move on to the rest of the story here.
It's fair to say that they forgot about God's covenant with Abraham. I mean, God made a covenant, made a promise to Abraham. Is it fair to say that they forgot that, or that they didn't think that God could keep his, because we're at the crucial point right here. Here's the promised land. They all know that's what it is, and they've been sent in to spy that out. And so maybe God couldn't keep his covenant because of this is a situation too hard to overcome, maybe.
No, thank you, Steve. I think and the only explanation we're left with is that they either forgot it or they just flat out didn't believe it. Because you're right, this is the culmination of it all right here. This is what God had told them would happen, what he was preparing them for. Here they are on the doorstep. And I think all of this is getting at the reason why this is the big one, right? This is why throughout the rest of the Old Testament and the New Testament, this is the highlighted failure. This was their opportunity to seize what God had promised, and they flat out didn't believe it, right? Okay, so let's keep going. You see in verse 11 into verse 10, God began to show up, right? The glory of the Lord appeared, and so the people are going to be in trouble here. Let's read 14:11, and we're not going to read the rest of 14, but we'll read down to verse 38. It says, "The Lord said to Moses," Numbers 14:11, "How long will this people spurn me? And how long will they not believe in me, despite all the signs which I have performed in their midst? I will smite them with pestilence and dispossess them, and I will make you into a nation greater and mightier than they." But Moses said to the Lord, "Then the Egyptians will hear of it, for by your strength you brought up this people from their midst, and they will tell it to the inhabitants of the land. They have heard that you, O Lord, are in the midst of this people, for you, O Lord, are seen eye to eye, while your cloud stands over them, and you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day and in a pillar of fire by night. Now, if you slay this people as one man, then the nations who have heard of your fame will say, because the Lord could not bring this people into the land, which he promised them by oath, therefore he slaughtered them in the wilderness. But now I pray, let the power of the Lord be great, just as you have declared. The Lord is slow to anger and abundant in loving kindness, forgiving iniquity and transgression, but he will by no means clear the guilty. visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generations. Pardon, I pray, the iniquity of this people according to the greatness of your loving kindness, just as you have forgiven this people from Egypt from Egypt even until now. So the Lord said, verse 20, I have pardoned them according to your word. But indeed, as I live, all the earth will be filled with the glory of the Lord. Surely all the men who have seen my glory and my signs which I performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, yet have put me to the test these 10 times and have not listened to my voice, they shall by no means see the land which I swore to their fathers, nor shall any of those who spurn me see it. But my servant Caleb, because he has had a different spirit, and his descendants shall take possession of it. A different spirit, and has followed me fully. I will bring into the land which he entered, and his descendants shall take possession of it. Now, the Amalekites and the Canaanites live in the valleys. Turn tomorrow and set out to the wilderness by the way of the Red Sea. Verse 26, the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, how long shall I bear with this evil congregation who are grumbling against me? I have heard the complaints of the sons of Israel, which they are making against me. Say to them, as I live, says the Lord, just as you have spoken in my hearing, so I will surely do to you. Your corpses will fall in this wilderness, even all your numbered men, according to the complete number, from 20 years old and upward, who have grumbled against me. Surely you shall not come into the land which I swore to settle you, except Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua the son of Nun. Your children, however, whom you said would become a prey, I will bring them in, and they will know the land which you have rejected. But as for you, your corpses shall fall in this wilderness. Your sons shall be shepherds for 40 years in the wilderness, and they will suffer for your unfaithfulness until your corpses lie in the wilderness. According to the number of days which you spied out the land, 40 days, for every day you shall bear your guilt a year, even 40 years, and you will know my opposition. I, the Lord, have spoken. Surely this I will do, and all this evil congregation who are gathered together against me. In this wilderness they shall be destroyed, and there they will die. As for the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land, and who returned and made all the congregation grumble against him by bringing out a bad report concerning the land, even those men who brought out the very bad report of the land died by a plague before the Lord. But Joshua the son of Nun, Caleb the son of Jephunneh, remained alive out of those men who went to spy out the land. Okay, so we saw before the report, we saw the response of the people. Here we have God's wrath and Moses' intercession. Okay, can you hold on for just a minute? What would you say is the basic argument that Moses takes up? What's Moses' case in interceding for the people? Ethan?
People think you're not strong enough to get your people into the land if you kill them. So it's for your own reputation that you should help us.
Okay, thank you, Ethan. Moses first talks about the reputation, right? The glory, the recognition of God. It says, people know you are the one that have done this. The Egyptians know that you're the one that have done this. You have received great glory from this. The people of the land know that you are with your people. If they all fall in the wilderness, what are people going to say about you, God? You see, he's concerned about God's glory and God's fame and the fallout if the people are slaughtered, right? There's also one other thing that Moses says, kind of in making his case to God, and what is that? Yeah, thank you, John. In verse 18, or verse 17, he says, let the power of the Lord be great, just as you have declared. And then he says in verse 18, the Lord is slow to anger, abundant in loving kindness. Jot down for yourself or make a note. Moses is essentially quoting here from God's own words in Exodus 34, where God passes by Moses and says, this is who I am. I am the Lord. I am slow to anger. I'm abounding in loving kindness. I am compassionate, right? God of faithful love. And so God is telling Moses, Moses is telling God, God, this is who you have said that you are. And so on account of your own character and your own promise, forgive these people as you said that you would. Okay? So you see that Moses' intercession really has nothing to do with the people and really has nothing to do with himself. It's all about God. God, for your glory, for the sake of your name and your character, please pardon this people. Xavier?
Yeah, no, definitely good waiting on me. I don't want to derail your train of thought. But my question for you is, as someone that kind of spaces in and out while you're reading Numbers, or when I'm reading Numbers, which is very rare, why does God get so specific here and then get less specific as we get to the end of the Old Testament and into the New Testament? Or what do you think?
In what way? Like, what do you mean by specific? Let me see, like.
I mean,
an
he's
example.
given us numbers. He's given. I mean, the book's called Numbers.
Oh, I see.
Like the level of detail is just.
Yeah.
It's hard to.
That's a good question. I would say, one of the analogies that we've used even for this class, you may remember, is like a father raising a little kid, right? And, in the New Testament, actually in Galatians, Paul will talk about the law of Moses being a tutor to lead us to Christ. And the image there, a tutor in the ancient world is like the guardian or the kind of nanny almost of a rich person's kids. Kind of take care of them and kind of lead, take them to school, educate them, oversee them, manage their lives until they're old enough to live, as an heir themselves, to be a full-grown adult. So I think there may be something in that. It would be an answer, a partial answer at least to your question, is that God is bringing his people to maturity, and like with a little kid, that means maybe more explicit rules and spelling out in detail early on, and then as a kid gets more mature and grows up, the goal is that they would internalize those principles and kind of make those decisions for themselves. And I think you see a lot of that in kind of the movement and the progression from the law of Moses into the new covenant, where, to your point, in some things, now there's obviously still some detail given in the New Testament, right? But there are a number of things, to your point, that are spelled out in a lot more detail in the Old Testament, that when you come to the New Testament, some of those things fade away, but the larger principles and foundational elements remain, because God wants his people to be mature in Christ and use their judgment and discernment for themselves in a way that would be pleasing to him. Does that make sense? Okay. You can just say that it does. It doesn't have to. Okay. So Moses intercedes for the people on account of God's glory, on account of God's promise. Verse 20, the Lord said, I have pardoned them. It's pretty amazing, right? As angry as God is with them, as he has every right to be angry with them and every right to do what he says he's going to do, consume them and start over. Yet, at Moses' intercession, God says, I have pardoned them. But, right, just because you are forgiven doesn't mean that there aren't consequences for your actions. And that's what you see in the rest of the chapter. Yes, the people are pardoned and God does not consume them. But he says, I will receive glory. The earth will be filled with my glory in verse 21. And so, all these people of this first generation will die. How does the consequence that is doled out by God here in the rest of 14, how does the consequence fit the transgression? How is it appropriate to their sin? Yep. In fact, what had they said when they saw how scary the promised land was? Go back to Egypt. Or they said, it'd be better to die in the wilderness. So God says, okay, go for it, right? You didn't want the promised land, like Muffy said, you won't get the promised land, okay? And then there's another interesting element of that too. Remember, they had said, if we go in, who's going to be in danger? Our little ones, right? Our wives and our little ones are going to be in danger with all these strong people. Well, God says, well, those little ones, those children you're so worried about, they'll be fine because I'm going to take care of them and I'm going to bring them into the land. They are going to see the land, verse 31. They will know it, but you, verse 32, your corpses will fall in the wilderness. Okay? So, in the rest of the chapter, there's kind of one, it's almost like a postscript to the story that is just the sad, ending to an already sad tale, which is that they say, okay, we'll do it, right? now we'll go, right? And so they scrounge up, I don't know how many of them were there. They say, okay, yep, we're wrong. Sorry, God, we'll fix it. We're going to go up into the promised land. We're going to take it now. So they try to go up. Moses tells them, no. You were only going to succeed in the first place by trusting God and doing it his way. Now you're disobeying God. He won't be with you. There's no way you will succeed. And that's exactly what happens. They are defeated because God is not with them. They are struck down in verse 45 and turned away. Okay, real quickly, about 5 minutes left. Share out, let's just talk, yell out your thoughts here. Taking this to us, as y'all were doing before I got here, okay, talking about the Israelites in the wilderness and their complaining, not trusting in God. Paul says all this is a picture of us and the temptations that we face as God's people too. So, how do we fit into the story here? What are we afraid of? And how does our fear cause us to do what the Israelites do in this story here? Cause us to disbelieve and disobey. So you can take back to John. Harrison says we don't follow God's pattern. Maybe because we're afraid. We're afraid of the implications. We're afraid of the consequences. Maybe. John?
I've been thinking a lot through this class about democracy and following the majority and maybe being afraid to buck that. And sometimes the majority has validity, but not when it goes against what God has promised, commanded, or asked of us. And so that's a clear indication.
Thank you, John. The fear of standing out is different when most people think one way about things. Thank you. Brian?
Hearken to what Jesus instructed his disciples, says, who will follow me will be those who deny themselves and pick up their cross and come to me. The cross being the symbol of hardship, affliction, sacrifice, and all of things that can go wrong in this world, persecution, because in the name of Christ, the world can be harsh. I mean, we're talking death, we're talking persecution, loss of jobs, loss of wealth, loss of everything. And that's what happened here. That you could every fear that's possible in this world is the fear that we're talking about here. But as Isaiah told, I forget the name of the king, as they're being baited, is if you don't stand firm in your faith, you won't stand at all.
Thank you, Brian. Albert?
Maybe this is too revealing on my part, but I'm afraid I'm on a journey and I don't know when the due date, the end date is. And so I have to keep myself in check and know that it'll come like a thief in the night and I need to be prepared. And but all around me as a human participant in this world, there's always due dates and end dates that you know that you're shooting for, or deadlines that you're shooting for, and we're on a journey and we don't know. And I personally feel that causes me to stumble from time to time because I just get anxious or I get scared or when and I get relaxed. And so if you're asking what I'm afraid of is I don't know. And so that plays on me.
Thank you, Albert. The famous Revelation 21:8 that as kids you had the song about liars go to hell. Sorry if I'm the only one that we'd sang that. Yeah. Liars is the last item on the list of the thing that will land you in the lake of fire, the second death. Anybody remember what the first item is on the list? Who goes in the lake of fire? First item? The cowardly. Cowardly. I don't know if I think about that enough. Cowardice as a sin that will land you in the lake of fire. And to all the things that have already been said, the fear of the unknown, the fear of all the difficulties of life, the fear of standing out. To serve God is to face our fear and to take on a life of difficulty, to do hard things. And how many times have I let my cowardice stand in the way of obeying God, trusting God, And we see in in Numbers 13 and 14, essentially the same thing that is being said in Revelation 21. It will keep you out, right? You will be left out of the promised land. We will be left out of the promised land if we let our fear be greater than our trust in God and our choosing to obey Him and trust in Him no matter what. Okay? All right, we'll pick up with maybe some of this stuff next week, but you can be getting into Numbers 15 to 17, and we'll do that. That's lesson 5 in your booklet. You can be preparing that for next Wednesday. Thank you, guys.